Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Got a lot of second bananas tonight, and we're going to start out with Robert Horton, who died recently at the age of 91. He was the second banana on Wagon Train, the popular Western of the late 50s and early 60s on television, starring Ward Bond, and then when Ward Bond died, John McIntyre. Robert Horton was the scout Flint McCulloch. I didn't think he was a great actor, but he had that rugged appearance and a great voice. Went to high school, by the way, with Judy Garland at Hollywood High, and he got the second banana role on Wagon Train. I thought Wagon Train was your basic average 50s Western. It was no Have Gun Will Travel. It wasn't even Maverick. The one thing Wagon Train had was great guest stars. They probably had the best guest stars of any Western. They had people like Charles Lawton. They had Leonard Nimoy in his early days. They had Linda Darnell. All sorts of wonderful character actors with stories on it. And here is one of the people whose podcast we've done recently, Theo Bickel, not surprisingly playing a musical instrument in a scene with Robert Horton.
Ah, how do you do, gentlemen? Splendid day, isn't it? Bit warm, perhaps?
Yeah, perhaps.
Oh, excuse me, gentlemen. I'm Daniel Denker, DM.
DM stands for?
A doctor of musicology. I'm president, vice president, and sole worker of my company, which designs and manufactures musical instruments.
I see. Where are you from?
By birth and inclination, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but the necessity of business has recently made me a traveler.
Pretty rugged country to be traveling alone in.
Oh, well, I have a very valuable cargo of instruments here, which I've contracted to deliver to San Francisco, and I'm waiting here for Mr. Hale's wagon train.
You're waiting for us?
Oh, one of you two gentlemen is Mr. McCullough?
That's right, that's me. This is Bill Hawks.
You do? How are you?
Where did you see Hale?
In Logan.
How did you get here before we did?
Theo Bickel is really good in that episode. Like I say, check out Wagon Train sometime just for the great guest stars they had. It's actually an amazing cast that they use in all the shows. Well, for some reason, Robert Horton, who wasn't a great actor, thought he was a singer too. And I don't think much of his singing either, but here he is singing the Wagon Train theme.
Roll across the prairie where there ain't no grass, rolling over mountains where there ain't no pass, sitting on a board, eyeing the weather, praying to the Lord we'll stay together side by side on the wagon train. Wagon train, roll along.
I don't know. Guy made a pretty good career out of that. We're going to move on now to Joe Santos, one of my favorite character actors who died recently at the age of 84. His best-known role is opposite Jim Garner, whose podcast we've done in the Rockford Files. Jim Garner is Jim Rockford, and in a recurring role, Joe Santos is LA Police Sergeant, later to be Lieutenant Dennis Becker. Here's a scene with Jim Garner and Joe Santos is just getting promoted to lieutenant.
Detective Becker, please.
Hey, Dennis, Jim. Hi, Jim. Guess what?
Hey, I'd like to ask you a favor. Dennis, I had a little run-in with some guys, and I got their license number. You want to take it down?
You know what that means, Jim.
Yeah, if we can get a make, I'll know who was chasing me. Now, would you like to address yourself to this little problem I have?
Okay, Jim, go ahead.
All right, 3 guys in a black Cadillac just tried to pick me up at gunpoint. Their license number is 271-IEW.
Why, you working on something?
No, I can't figure it. I never saw any of them before.
Okay, Jim, I'll run it.
Thanks, Dennis, and congratulations, huh?
Joe Santos did a lot of roles on television and the movies where he was either a cop or a bad guy, but his best role, in my opinion, is a very brief one in this classic Robert Mitchum movie that we've talked about before. Here's a trailer from The Friends of Eddie Coyle with Robert Mitchum selling guns to his friends.
This is Eddie Coyle.
I got 5 Smiths, 2 Lugers, and a 357 mag. You can open a bank with that thing all by yourself.
And these are his friends.
Well, his friends there are Jimmy Scalise, who's played by Alex Rocco, whose podcast we've done, and he talked about the movie in depth at that podcast. And his other friend is the other Boston hood, Artie Valentropo, Artie Van, who's played by Joe Santos, who doesn't get much screen time. But when he's on camera, you can't take your eyes off him. You know, later in his career, Joe Santos got a role in The Sopranos, but he's the kind of guy who never got that one role that would have made him a star, which is too bad because he really had a lot of flair and he could have been a big star. We're going to move on now to Larry Drake, another second banana who died recently at the age of 66. Larry Drake was an actor who was in a lot of dreck in his career. He was in Darkman and Bean, and those weren't bad movies. But his signature role was on television in the late 80s, early 90s drama L.A. Law. We talked about L.A. Law when we did Richard Dysart's podcast a couple of years back. Larry Drake did a memorable turn as the mentally impaired office boy for the legal firm. His name was Benny Stulwitz. Here he is in a scene with Corbin Burnson.
Ernie, the only one they didn't have was Revenge of the Nerds.
Great. What's with the old clothes?
Oh. Ernie, all the stuff you bought me is really, really nice. It's just that no matter what, I'll always look like what I am.
What are you?
I'm mentally retarded. Please, don't be mad, Arnie.
Who's mad?
Hey, look. I went back and found my cap.
Great.
It was stuck in the sewer grate. Lucky, huh?
I should mention they won 2 Emmy Awards for that role. My take on L.A. Law is that the scripts were generally junk, but the actors were all top-notch and the acting was first-rate, and Larry Drake was right up there. We're going to move on now to our feature tonight, the real second banana, Frank Sinatra Jr., who died recently at the age of 72. That's right, the son of the chairman of the board. When he was young, he had his dad's looks, he had a decent voice, but nothing like his dad, and he spent his whole career living in his dad's shadow. He wasn't a bad guy. He was relatively good-natured about the whole thing, but unfortunately he's best known for something that happened when he was 19 years old. 2 weeks after JFK was killed, Frank Sinatra Jr. was kidnapped. Now, you'd think this would be a stupid crime, and so did I. I mean, come on, you're going to kidnap Frank Sinatra's son? But you know what? It turned out surprisingly well for all of those involved, with one exception. Here's Ed Hurley telling the story of Frank Sinatra Jr.'s kidnapping in December of 1963.
The horrifying ordeal of Frank Sinatra Jr. began while he was filling an engagement at Lake Tahoe. He was on the bill at the Horror Casino, and there was no shadow of the impending crime as he held the floor at an earlier performance. The young man was following in the footsteps of his father. The eldest Sinatra was the idol of Bobby Soxers in the 30s. While he was fulfilling his engagement at the resort on the California-Nevada state line, young Frank was staying at this motel annex. He was having dinner before one of his shows when his abductors moved in. An FBI padlock seals the door of his room as clues are sought. A trumpet player, John Foss, was with Sinatra when the 2 armed gunmen spirited him away. Foss was able to give the authorities little help as police set up roadblocks within 15 minutes. The kidnappers, however, slipped the net and drove their victim to Los Angeles 400 miles away. They forced Sinatra to make the trip hidden in the trunk compartment. The eldest Sinatra received 8 phone calls with instructions on ransom payments, and in the early morning hours, more than 2 days later, was able to announce his son's return. Young Sinatra had been released a few miles from home as others of the gang picked up the ransom money. He had a long rest at his mother's house after nearly 3 days with little sleep. It was another ordeal as he faced reporters' questions.
I was scared. I was a little bit nervous, naturally, but the only thing I could do was hope for the best.
Third act curtain to the Sinatra kidnapping. FBI agents search a house in the Canoga Park area of Los Angeles. The house, they say, where Frank Sinatra Jr. was held for ransom. 3 men were arrested, including Barry Keenan, a 23-year-old unemployed salesman. Keenan is said to be the driver of the car in which young Sinatra was driven from Lake Tahoe to Los Angeles. Another suspect arrested was Joseph Emsler, also 23 years old. Later, a third man was picked up in San Diego. There are no other suspects, says the FBI. Most of the money, all in small bills, was recovered. The accused men had no chance to spend much, so swift were the arrests. At Mrs. Sinatra's Bel Air home, there's an atmosphere of thanks and rejoicing. As for the missing money, the boy's father said he couldn't care less. The entire family, father, mother, sister Nancy, and Frank Jr., all echoed the same thought, thank God it's over. A happy ending to what could have been a tragedy.
All right, so let's review this. Frank Sinatra's kid gets kidnapped. Sam Giancana, by the way, offered the mob help to find the kidnappers, but Frank Sinatra turned them down, said let the FBI handle it. And they got the guys a couple of days later, and this guy, Barry Keenan, was the mastermind. He was a classmate of Nancy Sinatra's at University High, and his family had hit on hard times, and he was fooling around with alcohol and drugs. and he needed money, so he concocted this kidnapping, got two of his friends, and he actually got a third acquaintance to help him out a little bit, who we'll talk about in a minute. Actually, he planned the thing pretty well. They were originally going to kidnap Frank Sinatra Jr. in Arizona, but that fell through. Then they were going to kidnap him on November 22nd, but events sort of overtook that. So 2 weeks later, in Lake Tahoe, they kidnapped him, and they actually got away with it. They beat a police roadblock. They made a successful transfer of the money. They let Frank Jr. out on the highway, and he walked home. And it's conceivable that they could have gotten away with it, but one of the guys blabbed to one of his relatives, and the relative turned him in. So they were caught pretty quickly. They were tried almost right away. One of the guys got 16 years. One of the guys got life, and Barry Keenan got life. But the two other guys got out in about 3 years, and amazingly, Barry Keenan got out in less than 5 years. That's California justice for you in the 1960s. In any event, Barry Keenan went on to become a multi-million-dollar real estate magnate. Think about that. The guy could have easily been rubbed out, but he still went on to make millions of dollars. And you know what? Frank Sinatra Jr. was reasonably good-natured about the whole thing, too. The lawyers of these kidnappers wanted to say that it was a hoax and that Frank Sinatra Jr. was in on it. He didn't like that, and that wasn't true. And Barry Keenan felt sort of sorry for that, especially because that rumor has persisted throughout the years. There was a little bit of money that was never recovered. One of the guys said he used it to buy furniture for his wife. Frank Sinatra said, let her keep the furniture. So everybody came through this pretty well, except for one guy, that fourth guy who I mentioned. Technically, he wasn't an accomplice, but he sure had a hand in it. It was Dean Torrance, and if you've heard that name before, that's because that's Dean Torrance of Jan and Dean fame. He was also a classmate of Barry Keenan's, and what he did was he lent him a couple $100 to help carry out the scheme, and then lent him a couple $100 more, went to the bank and actually got him a couple $100 more after Frank Sinatra Jr. had been kidnapped. That would make him an accomplice in my book. I don't know. He also might have taken a little bit of the ransom money for a brief period of time for safekeeping, but he didn't keep it. No, he said he felt sorry for Barry Keenan, and he denied it originally on the stand when it went to trial. He was never charged with anything. But you know, he did give that money to him, and then he finally recanted and said that he lied on the stand. Nothing ever happened to him legally. Now this is 1964, and Jan and Dean are at the height of their popularity. Jan Barry, who didn't know anything about it, I have a feeling he was pretty upset with Dean Torrance with this. The other guy who I think was pretty upset was Frank Sinatra. Now, I can't tell you anything for sure, but what I can say was after that trial where Dean Torrance lied on the stand about giving money to Barry Keenan, Jan and Dean's career was never the same after that. About a year and a half after that, Jan Barry had a bad car accident. No, Sinatra didn't have anything to do with that. That was completely independent. But I will tell you this, something changed in show business for Jan and Dean after that kidnapping. I'm not going to say that Frank Sinatra had anything to do with it. No evidence he ever did or ever said anything to anybody, but hey, maybe it's just a coincidence. I have to wonder how this was playing out for their young guru Lou Adler, who was trying to make his name in Hollywood at the time. In August of '64, they were supposed to have a role in Ride the Wild Surf, a Fabian movie from Columbia, but their roles were mysteriously cut out, except for them singing the title song.
Gotta take that one last, gotta take that one last ride. Ride, ride, ride the wild surf. Ride, ride, ride the wild surf. Ride, ride, ride the wild surf. Gotta take that one last ride.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe for a while there, Dean was thinking that Frank was going to take him on that one last ride. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and we're going to close tonight with Myrtle Audrey Ahrensberg, a.k.a. Gogi Grant, who died recently at the age of 91. She was a nice Jewish girl from Philadelphia, and she was a singer. She only had one big hit, but it was a monster. #1 for 6 weeks in 1956, one of the biggest songs of the year. It knocked Elvis's Heartbreak Hotel from the top of the charts. Everyone from Patsy Cline to Sam Cooke covered this song. Even the Beatles sang it in their Hamburg days. I wish I had a copy of that. We're going to close with Gogi Grant's definitive signature version of The Wayward Wind.
The wayward wind is a restless wind, a restless wind that yearns to wander, and he was born the next of kin, the next of kin